Hi there, friends. My name is Diane. Thank you so much for joining me today for creating a sense of motion in a still landscape in oil pastel. So grab your oil pastels and your mug of hot cocoa or whatever it is that makes you happy, and let's get started. So before we get started on the drawing, I'm just going to talk to you about the materials you'll need for this short class. You're going to need a piece of paper suitable for oil pastel. You'll need a reference picture to work from. This is a painting that you'll see this information on the bottom of your page as well, the bottom of your screen. This is by Claude Monet. It's called Nymphaeus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. It was painted in 1916 to 19, and it's oil on canvas. So you can just internet search that one and download it, print it out, preferably on photo paper if you want to have more accurate sort of poppy colors to work from. You can also choose to work from a screen if that's preferable. It's just harder to match colors that way. And you'll also need your set of oil pastels and a pencil to draw with. So let's get started. We're just going to do a small section right about here just to explore the motion of this painting and how to create motion in an impressionist way using oil pastels, copying one of the great masters of Impressionism, of course, Claude Monet. So I'm just going to draw a few lily pads, these three, I guess 4 lily pads here and a couple flowers. So I'm going to start with the central one and just kind of make an oval just as big as you want it to be. The bigger it is, the longer it'll take you to color. So if you want to make it a little smaller, that's fine. You don't want to go super tiny though, because it's harder to color in then and get all of this motion to show up. And then there's another one kind of staggered over it, right? Kind of cuts through the center. I'm doing this one now. Sticks out about as far to the side and kind of just does something like that. And then there's one right below it, which is both taller and wider because it's closer to us than the other two. So I'm going to make it stop about here, a little further out than that one. And then if I look straight up, it's just about underneath the left side of that top one. Barely grazes this. And since I want to make it taller than that, I'm going to go about down to there. So I'm just going to draw an oval for now. I'll put the little triangle thingy in a minute. Something like that. And then there's this little cut in, which kind of barely comes down. If you make it go too far down, it will look flat rather than disappearing into the distance. I'm going to get rid of some of my extra lines I don't need. It looks like my eraser had a little bit of green on it or something, which isn't ideal, but I am going to be coloring over that, so I'm not concerned about it. And then I'm going to draw a little flower up here. So for that, I'm just going to kind of draw like almost a little teacup shape, a really loose, uneven teacup for that little flower. I'll do another one right here where these 2 lily pads meet. And those are just placeholders, chunky placeholders. And then this lily pad, I'm not even going to draw because it's sort of just a mishmash of lines. It's not even really a shape. So we'll start with that. And now we're going to go on to the color. So, excuse me, with oil pastel, it's a good idea to kind of layer light to dark because it does pull off a little bit, like you can scrape off the oily residue, but once you get the color on there, it's hard to remove it or go over it. So I wouldn't want to start with dark purples and greens and then try to integrate light yellows and pinks because you won't really be able to get those to show up. So I'm going to start with whites for the flowers, and you can see all these little peekaboos of whitish yellow kind of showing through in that area. So I'm going to color whitish yellow randomly in some spots around the lily pads. First, you may have dirty oil pastels as I do, so just color a little bit on the side of your paper or a piece of scratch paper to get it clean. And then I'm just going to color in the flowers solid white. And I'm pressing fairly hard because I want a solid, bright coat of white on the bottom of these flowers. And that'll really help the pinks to pop forward later when we put the pinks on. And that's it. Oh, one other thing, I was coloring vertically because the flowers are growing vertically. The petals grow up. So whenever you're coloring from the very beginning, even if you're just coloring white, try to get in the habit of coloring in the direction that you see in your reference or that you want it to appear. Like I wouldn't have wanted to do that horizontally. Not that I couldn't just cover that up later, but it really just helps to form the picture as you go. So now I'm going to use an off-white, which you probably cannot tell the difference because this is a video, but I can see it. It's a little bit yellowy. And I'm just going to go around and kind of randomly color some patches to create placeholders for where I want little bits of yellowy white poking through. It does not have to match Mr. Claude Monet's painting exactly. I would strongly advise against that because you'll probably go nuts trying to copy it. We are doing a loose copy just to get the feeling of motion in an oil pastel. So now we're going to just kind of start putting colors in, lighter to darker. So I'm going to use kind of this off brownish gray to begin with, just as a base coat, and to start laying in some areas like it's kind of hard to describe, but I guess to create a grayer ground so that when I put the purples in, and the purples are very bright, oops, sorry, that's the blue, much brighter than the purple I see here, I can put the purple into this grayish brown and it'll help to neutralize the purple a little bit and make it go on softer and a little more dull. So I'm making sure to get right up to the edge of the lily pad and wiggle a little bit with my strokes. And I'm not pressing hard, just going in vertical strokes to kind of mimic the motion of those reflections in the water. Just real loose. I can always go back with more of this. It's just a base coat. And I'm absolutely going into my yellowy whites to some degree, not on purpose, but I'm running into them because I can't really see them because they're on white paper. And that's totally fine. Let me get a little bit out here. Okay, we'll put that aside for now. And then I'm going to go in with some pink and put that down as a base for the flowers. So planting it at the bottom, I'm just sort of flicking up. In the center, going straight up, and on the sides, curving to mimic the curve of the flowers. Not at all going near the top of the flower, because that should be whitish. And because everything in this painting reflects everything else, like most paintings do, I'm going to put a little bit of pink into the water as well. And that anytime you can kind of reflect the color from one object to its neighboring object, it will usually help to enhance the realism and the complexity of your image. Like if I just had pink flowers and green lily pads and purple water, there would be no relationship between them and no dance. So this creates the dance. And you can see I went pretty light with the pink in the water because it's not really pink, it's more purpley. So I just kind of went light, but there is a pink patch over here, so I'm going to just add some pink there and some more brownish gray over that to neutralize. Don't worry also if it feels like it's too dark, like that is not nearly as light as this. We can always go back over it with white later to blend. So now the colors are generally pretty dark, so I'm just going to go in with the purple since I have it out. You could also choose to start with green if you want, but I'm just choosing purple because it's here. So I'm going to go in and start putting in lines, and this is where we'll really start seeing that motion in the water because the purple is so dominant. And I'm just going real light, not paying attention too much to full coverage, just more that I'm getting color everywhere that I want it. And purple is the dominant color in the water. And we'll definitely add a lot of greens and browns too, but this is a good way to kind of kick off. I'm going to put just a few dabs into the flowers for the same reason I just talked about, that reflection. And I'm going to just put a little bit into the lily pads, just very lightly, where I see the sort of bluish colors, even though I'm going to go over it with blues and grays, just as that reflected, to create that reflective quality. Just really light lines, and notice I did the direction of the lily pads more rounded. So now we'll go in with, I'll just choose the green next, light green, because it seems like that needs a presence. So I'm going to go into the lighter areas of the lily pad. This one right here, that's going to need to be adjusted. It's a little bit too bluish green, so I'm going to need to add some yellow. But I'll do that later. And then I'm going to start putting in some horizontal strokes a little bit right next to that flower for these vague lily pads. But mostly, I'm just going to put a few strokes into the water. And keep in mind, I'm using a lighter green right now, which there isn't a whole lot of it, but there is some presence in the water. So I'm just going to add. And at this point, hopefully you're asking yourself, I hope this is going to work out. This looks like a disaster. And if you are asking yourself that question, you're probably doing it right. So don't panic. We will get there. I'm going to add some yellow to that green, like I just said, not being very specific about it, just kind of covering it a little bit. And then I'll go on to some dark green, and that will help to define some shapes a little bit more. So on this lily pad, there's a lot of dark green on the left and lots of liney stuff, somewhat on the bottom of this one. And now I'm going to use the dark green to start kind of creating more thicker ropes of color going down into the water, because it's very dominant. I can use the purple this way too at some point. Or I may not need to actually, but it seems like the thicker ropes are kind of on the left side more. A few horizontal strokes right here into that lily pad. A little bit going up from the flower. And somewhat over here as well. I'm going to switch to blue now and kind of accentuate the blues in the lily pads. The blue, my blue anyway, is going to be too bright, so I'm going to go back and dull it with some gray later. But right now this is just a sketchy placeholder. That one doesn't really have I'll put a little bit, doesn't have much blue in it. This one is quite blue. And I'll add some into the water, mostly into these thick ropey sections. So hopefully you can still see your lily pads and your flowers. If you can, you're doing great. Where shall we go from here? How about we add some gray? So this is fun. This is the fun part, or one of the many fun parts in my opinion. Part of it for me is putting in the initial colors, but then when you get to dull and blend is really fun. So watch what happens to this lily pad. It's going to get much closer to this color because the blue and green are currently too bright, and they're also not covering the whole thing. There's lots of white peeking through. So we're going to use the gray color in the direction of the lily pad and press pretty hard so that it both dulls down the blue, and it should somewhat look more like the reference. And then same thing into the green, just color right into it. And see what happens there. It makes it, the green and blue kind of blend together, gets rid of most of those little white spots, and makes the color match the reference much better. So I'm going to do that with all the lily pads. I should have mentioned this before, but I've kept kind of a gutter of white around these lily pads so I don't lose them as I'm coloring, because they could easily get lost in the water. But we are going to fill that in with brown, reddish brown and dark brown at some point. So now my lily pads are pretty solid and much more matching to the reference photo. I'm going to add a little bit of gray in the water, not much, just kind of in the lighter areas to get a presence of the gray. And then I'm going to use a lighter gray and blend up here where I had previously put that pink and the brownish color, that patch. And I'm also going to use it to blend the purple. Actually, I may need to add more purple. Let me see what happens here. So I'm going to start trying to blend the purple. That's working very well. Maybe not up here anyway. I may need to add more purple down here because I feel like I just don't have enough purple presence in the bottom area. But this light gray, the lightest gray I have in my kit, is a great blender for the water, purple and other colors alike, because it's helping to kind of unify the colors without over blending them. And you can over blend pretty easily just by pressing too hard and coloring too much over an area. So keep it light, and you can always go over it more. It's just hard to remove something if you've done too much of it. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm staying kind of wiggly. So I'm trying not to get straight, beautiful lines. We want it to be very fluid so that we're recreating this sense of motion. And indeed, I do want to put in more purple down here. So I'm going to do that. And as we talked about before, the purple is very dominant, so you don't have to try very hard to get it to show up. Just kind of filling in the lighter areas. And then I'm going to go back with that lighter gray again and blend them. And now I am pressing hard with the gray because I'm just targeting the areas of purple, and I just want to blend those, but I'm not trying to integrate them with the other colors, the greens, I mean, anymore. So that's pretty good. I need to get this a little bit blended under this flower here. So now just kind of evaluating the browns and the outliney things are going to be the last thing we put in, but I'm looking at the flowers and they seem to need a little more love, a little more dark pink. So I'm going to see, yes, I have a darker pink. So I'm going to plant it at the bottom and just put in some dabs, planting it at the base and just flicking up into the flower to get a little bit more of that fuchsia color. And that will suggest that those are actually flowers. And I'm feeling pretty happy with the color, so I'm going to go in with the browns now. And I can go back and adjust and add more if I need to, but if you're feeling fairly complete except for the outlines, that's a good time to outline. By outline, I mean create really super sketchy, kind of thick, very organic feeling edging around the lily pads. Not even necessarily complete outlines. Like you could leave space showing and fill it in with purple or green or something. On this one, there isn't a whole lot of this reddish brown. Looks like it's more of the dark brown. Same thing on this one. There's a few lines of it. But I'm mostly focusing on filling in the white that I left around those lily pads. And now we have 3 outline lily pads, which makes them look a little removed from the picture. So I'm going to take that reddish brown and press pretty hard to get it to show up and put little bits of lines, wiggly lines into the water. And that will get the outlines on the lily pads to have a relationship with the surrounding area. Oh, I need to get some in this one too. I forgot that. Something like that. And then we'll use the dark brown, and this is the one that's going to show up darker or better because it's darker. So I'm going very sketchy, not trying to create full coverage because I want some of that reddish color to show up around the edges too. But just almost just pretend your hand is very nervous or excited. That might be a better emotion. We don't want to be nervous. But like you can't make a straight line to save your life. Just kind of like let your emotion flow into your hand, and that will help to mimic these lovely bits of motion turned into emotion. I'm dabbing at the bottom of the flower because there's a lot of white showing there. So you should end up with something like this, putting more dark brown into the water, again, to create kind of a presence there. And then you can go back and monkey with it as much as you want. Like I'm going to put a little bit of brown into my lily pad itself so that it doesn't look so outlined. Just a few random lines, something like that. And a little bit underneath this flower, it looks like it's needing some weight under it. And I'm pretty happy with that. So as soon as you're happy with yours, you can be done. Or you could, if you're on a bigger piece of paper, you can work out, like continue, do the whole thing, or do some more Monets or other impressionist works to just enhance your experience. I hope you had a good time with this today. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you so much for joining me and have a beautiful rest of your day.